from machine intelligence. Our only hope, many say, and quantum computing and so forth, which is a process that could also more easily destroy human civilization than anything in history. It is also astonishingly paradoxical. All right, let's see. The alternative would be the alternative to an ideological collapse whereby we return to a kind of state of nature. Okay. The alternative would be that we instead conform more and more efficiently to the project of civilization, which is um, moving towards less harm, less unnecessary harm, and more fulfilling lives. But, however, this progress, this definition of the project of civilization um, is indistinguishable from AI. And AI itself could destroy human civilization. Um, I suppose that's a claim that might be true. I can't really comment on that. It is a claim though. Um, this okay, so you're making a comparison that like the project of civilization resembles AI, and AI is also a process that could destroy humanization more easily than anything else. Um, that's making a you're making a comparison to one process to another. Like, sure, but you're saying this is like this, and since this could do something, again, a claim, you're saying this could also do that other thing. Like, that's not logical. It might be true. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily follow that. Freud, in an essay I'm reading, says as a species, we are in a period of maturation beyond religious ideals, after which we can pursue moral standards with only a social justification rather than a divine one. And this clash between conservative religionists and LGBTQA seems to take the form of a clash of religious ideals. Yeah, it seems to do that. I would agree that the comparison is apt. um, I wouldn't, which isn't to say like legally if I was in a court, then I'm saying that they are that because that is a comparison. So like it also doesn't follow that like because conservative religionists and LGBTs both treat their values like religions, that therefore anything that applies to religion or applies to like LGBTAs, like that is not logical. But I will agree that the comparison seems apt to me. So let's consider, so going forward and considering what is derisively termed wokeism does seem to take the form of religious movement in a way that it forbids criticism or questioning of ideals, its use of rituals, its embrace of certain spiritual notions of embodiment and participation in universal forces and so forth. Yeah, just stopping after like it takes does seem to take the form of religious movement in the way that it forbids criticism, questioning ideals. Yes, in that the idea of wokeism is really an ideal of tolerance, and as I said before, tolerance to be upheld needs to be critical of intolerance by nature. So criticism of tolerance, like blah blah blah. It forbids criticism or questioning of ideals, like taking an intolerant stance, like criticizing tolerance or questioning the ideal of tolerance, will be met naturally by people who are upholding tolerism as an identification of tolerance. Sure. Um, and then you're elaborating on other things um, that wokeism is, other aspects to wokeism that could be criticized. So its use of rituals, its embrace of certain spiritualist notions of embodiment, sure, and participation in universal forces. I'm guessing participation in universal forces is a reference to, or an allusion towards, like um, the patriarchy as a force and so forth. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with this. But for the same reasons, the conservatives should then be defending it. But for the same reasons, the conservatives should be defending it, along with their defense of religious freedom. With their defense of religious freedom. So it, I guess, is wokeism, or I'm in my, I guess, argument I'm constructing right now, that like upholding tolerance, um, that conservatives should then be defending tolerance along with their defense of religious freedom. Um, sure, okay. I think this is where I'll backtrack to point out that like just because an ideal of tolerance resembles in a lot of ways like religious tenets, uh, in the way that people respond to criticism of them. Um, they aren't. They still. They can be like that, but they aren't necessary religious freedom. Therefore, there's no paradox with conservatives should be defending tolerance or wokeism because it is also religious freedom. It's not. Even though the comparison is there, it acts like that. So I don't see any paradox there. And perhaps more importantly, like ancient religions, this religious process is telling us crucially important things about moral convictions and our history as a species that it would be absurd to dismiss, which of course conservatives delight in doing. All right, so, but for the same reasons, the conservatives should be defending it along with their defense of religious freedom. I'm guessing it's possible I might have missed a connection, like the upholding of tolerance in the way that a religious person upholds a religion, the method of upholding that or defending it, the method itself means that conservatives should also be upholding it. I guess maybe there's something to that I'm missing, and there's a connection I haven't pointed out there, but I guess I would need to explain to me more clearly. Okay, going on, and perhaps, okay, so conservatives should then be defending it along with their religious freedom, and perhaps, and like ancient religions, this religious process is telling us crucially important things about moral convictions in our history as a species that it would be absurd to dismiss. and our history as a species, that would be absurdism. Okay, something. Okay. This religious process, I'm guessing by this religious process you're saying wokeism, which is coming right out and saying that it is something when you were just making a comparison. So I think that's a mistake or a flaw in that argument, but I guess accepting that premise for a second, or say this the wokeism is telling us crucially important things about moral convictions and our history as a species, that it would be absurd to dismiss. Yeah, maybe. I guess let's see if you explain what those are. Okay. I guess you're saying wokeism teaches us things about moral convictions and our history as a species that we shouldn't dismiss, but it's paradoxical that conservatives do. Um, I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose, or like I suppose that it is paradoxical. I would I would actually say, okay, we're making comparison between like wokeism and religious ideals, and conservatives um, like to uphold like religious tenets and point out um, what it teaches about our species and moral convictions, and yet they take this very similar process of like upholding tolerance, um, and dismiss it as far as like not teaching us anything about like that. I would say that's more ironic. That's ironic and not a paradox, which you've only implicitly structured this to say that they're being paradoxical by doing that, I guess, because the whole theme of this is paradox. But maybe you wouldn't disagree with that. But just to point that out, I think that there's irony there that conservatives are quick to dismiss tolerance or wokeism, despite them sometimes nonsensically retaliating against the questioning of their religious held beliefs. Sure. Anyways, I think the paradox, which Freud references, of Saint Boniface cutting down the daughter's oak to prove to Germanic pagans that their gods would not smite them for this sacrilegious act. I think of the paradox which Freud references of Saint Boniface, which is blah blah blah. On one hand, he was obviously right, which pagans saw, but then they converted to Christianity into another religious system. On one hand, he was right, but on the other, they converted to Christianity. I'm not sure I understand that like on one hand, on the other, being two sort of opposites. I'm not sure I see what the opposite here is, because you're saying they saw that he was right and they also converted. Like, I don't see those seem to be like almost a natural consequence. Maybe there was a thought or an implication that you were focusing on when you were structuring that as on the one hand, the other hand. But that would be interesting to hear. Perhaps you were thinking, on the one hand, the pagans saw the cruelty of his his sacrilegious act being justified by a false conclusion. But on the other hand, they end up converting anyways. I guess that makes more sense to me. I'm just pointing out that, like, the pagans wouldn't necessarily see that he was right. They might believe that he was right, but I guess it's like the Germanic pagan, or the Saint Boniface is making a claim that he would not be smote, and he wasn't, therefore he was right. I guess that's true. So but like, that's an argument that would be framed specifically to favor Saint Boniface. Like, and here I'm making devil's advocate, I suppose, but like, there's an unfairness and an intolerance to him saying, I have the right to destroy your religious icon, and what gives me the right to do that is the fact that I won't be punished for it by your gods. Like, I mean, I think most people understand that that's kind of a shitty thing to do. What am I saying here? A shitty thing to do being justified by an almost non-provable point or something, you know, like whether or not he got struck by lightning wouldn't have actually proved that their God was true. Like, the existence of God is not provable or disprovable, so like either way, it's like the justification of him destroying their religious artifact and him being right, having the right to do so, is based upon an unfalsifiable claim, and so it isn't really justifiable, not legally anyways, and it's certainly like an immoral act, which again is like it's an immoral act because it's intolerant, I suppose. So like I think that I would strike that up to another case towards someone who would uphold tolerance is like, or at least chalk that up to a -1 to this example of being in favor of like, well, if we tolerate everyone, like you could have these Germanic pagans believing that they had a god or whatever in this Donner's Oak, when Saint Boniface sort of proved otherwise, or like that doesn't seem like a strike in that case, which I don't think that you're saying actually, but let me I'm wandering off topic a little bit. Let me continue to piece things together. On the other hand, he was obviously right, which the pagans saw, but then they converted to Christianity into another religious system. Okay, yeah. Again, like on the other hand, doesn't suit that. And our contemporary approach to scientific enterprise is really no less paradoxical than St. Boniface's. Well, I guess if you're saying paradoxical in that St. Boniface was making a made a sacrilegious act that was justified by an unfalsifiable claim, then yes, that would be paradoxical. And our contemporary approach to the scientific enterprise is really no less paradoxical than St. Boniface's. Well, if I understood, if that was correct, and my summing that up, that the paradox is how St. Boniface is justifying his acts upon, like, well, your gods didn't smite me, therefore I was justified in doing it, then no, I wouldn't say that our approach to the scientific enterprise is just as paradoxical, because the scientific enterprise, by definition, is one that is concerned with claims that are falsifiable. And maybe it's tempting to straw man and say, like, oh yeah, but people treat scientific enterprise, the idea of scientific enterprise, in this quasi-religious way, which might be the case, but that's not what scientific enterprise is by definition. So I don't support that point. Alright, I guess I share all this because I sense that of all my friends, you are the wisest in regard to being at the edge of this religious development and the pursuit of rationalism and the ethical maturation of society. You're keenly sensitive to and aware of all this. I suppose what you're saying is that I'm at the edge of this religious development is that I am an LGBT person and therefore concerned with the progress of tolerance in how tolerance shapes policy, which I wouldn't agree, one, saying that, again, it's not a religious development. That's an assertion I am refuting with these points on here. But, like, two, being at the edge of it, I think that's overly generous and not particularly political, or really pursuing policy changes actively. Much more of a bystander here. But yes, I am sensitive to and aware of all these things. Sure. A crucial point that I feel is being missed by all discussions of social inclusion at present is this: what sets the movement of trans rights apart from the movements for gay rights, any minority race identity rights, is that trans rights makes not only the demand for inclusion, but the demand for a fundamental change in social interactions, whereby even a well-intentioned "good morning, miss" could be evaluated as an act of harm, blah blah blah. You've assumed I identify as a woman when I don't. Instead, you ask me how I identify. Sure. Yeah, this is okay, so this is a big claim that all trans rights activism works the same way, which is just not the case. There are good faith actors, there are bad faith actors, there are people who intend well but have bad methods or problematic methods, as you're trying to point out, which I agree anyways. And there are people who have good bad arguments but good methodology, I suppose. I'll rephrase this tendency here in a simpler way right now, that we're pointing out you're pointing out the inherent authoritarianism of advocating for a change that requires participation, and not just implicit agreement by avoiding certain actions. And that's probably not that's probably less clear, but I'm like saying if you have a rule that says everyone must do this action compared to a rule like everyone must not do this action, I agree that this action is more authoritarian and more problematic. So yeah, I'm not gonna disagree there. This is different. Okay, so continuing on the trans thing, the good morning, a fundamental change in actions. They need to participate and actively participate in these ideals instead of just avoiding certain rules, or certain faults. This is different from previous movements in scope and is part of why so many people are freaking out conceptually over these demands. They're used to people demanding inclusion, and this is accomplished by simply ceasing to exclude them. Yeah, okay, we're saying the same thing. But the authoritative demand by which you have to reconstitute your fundamental interactions with the new risk of moral failure is anxiety risking. I assume that we're saying the same thing, but let me break down these big words. But the authoritative demand by which you have to reconstitute your fundamental. Alright, so why that just seems like unnecessary unclear. Like, why all the multisyllabic words all of a sudden? Like, it's. It says nothing to your argument at all, but like for me reading this, I do think I do take issue with style here. But let me try and like see what you're meaning. They are used to people demanding. Let's see. People freaking out. They're used to people demanding inclusion, and this is being accomplished by ceasing to exclude them, which is conceptually simple. But the authoritative demand by which you have to reconstitute your fundamental interactions with a new risk of moral failure is anxiety inducing people. Okay, so I guess you're saying like reconstitute your fundamental interactions, like fundamental interactions being how do I interact with this person? How do I say hello? How do I stand and everything? And all that, like, ooh, I need to like reconstruct everything on there. And if I don't do it right, then I have moral failure, is anxiety inducing in people. Yeah, it's true. If the idea is that people are being asked to grow up and stop clinging to exclusionary gender, if the idea is that people are being asked to grow up and stop clinging to exclusionary gender illusions, then what we are seeing is the same neurotic process. We see in children being asked to grow up and observe what are to them new authoritative social norms that come with threats of punishment. Alright, so the use of exclusionary gender illusions is vague here. And I have to piece out what you mean by that. So I'm assuming it's not just exclusionary versus inclusionary, like above, where I can like substitute fringe or even heretical, I suppose, like unusual here, because that would mean stop clinging to unusual gender illusions. or stop clinging to fringe gender illusions. It seems like the structure of this is that the people who are being asked to grow up and stop clinging to these are the people who are conservatively stick to male versus female only pronouns. So in this sense, it seems like exclusionary means not having gender pronouns that include like non-binary genders and things, which is like, right on towards what exclusionary means. So sure. I mean, I think that makes sense. But the setup there where you're suggesting or implying an opposite between inclusionary and exclusionary is I wouldn't say hurts it so much as like unfairly through unfair rhetoric kind of supports and comes back to say like, oh, this is a double hit at the end, when really that wasn't in the context earlier, an actual opposite that was presented. But like here, obviously, it is a binary, like so to speak, a binary between like you either are inclusive with your gender pronouns or you're exclusive. Then yes, that is accurate here. So sure, but I'm gonna ignore its implications as to like the previous argument because I don't think that was um, an apt term to be used earlier. If the idea is that people are being asked to grow up and stop clinging to exclusionary gender illusions, um, then what we are seeing is the same neurotic process by which a child is challenged by rules. Summing that up. Um, yeah, I guess so. It's the same okay, so the idea, you're making a comparison between like people being asked to stop using old he or she, just stop only doing that and actually start incorporating exclusionary things.